We are continuing to work through Hebrews here to the tail end of chapter 4. That's kind of where I have us at. All right, let's recap a little bit here. So, Book of Hebrews, the author, we're not positive who it is, possibly Paul. He's concerned about this group of people that have definitely a Hebrew background, that they are going to fall away from pursuing God because of the pressures of the world around them. So he's bouncing back and forth between instructing them about who Jesus is and encouraging them to pursue him. And the goal is always look to Jesus. The idea is God's always been talking. He's been talking through the prophets. He's been talking through his word. He's been talking through the angels. And now we have perfect clarity in what he's been saying because we have Jesus to look to. And Jesus is we're getting these examples of like Moses and other people that weren't bad. They were what God used in his time, but Jesus is the better version. Jesus is always the perfect version. He's the chosen one who gave his life by coming down and humbling himself to live the life that we have to live, but he lived it perfectly. But he can, having gone through this life, which is where we're reading this section now, he's able to relate to us. He came down to connect with us, to share this life, he understands everything we're going through, and we can connect with him even more so because he's lived that life to be with us then obviously he saved us through his death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. He's on high with God now, interceding for us and encouraging us. And his work is done, but the earth is still in a broken state because there is a time that has to happen that God wants everyone that can possibly enter his kingdom to come in. So we're living in that phase between the completed work of Jesus, in that he did everything he's going to do, but we are to live out, bring his kingdom to earth, that we can demonstrate to the world, everyone that possibly can come to him, as we want to present that opportunity to everyone. And that's the phase of the world we're living in now. So ultimately the goal is Jesus. The focus is Jesus. Our singular focus should be Jesus because that's what we're aiming towards. We are all on the path to becoming like him as we pursue it. That's our ultimate goal in this life. So that's kind of where we're kind of gone up to at this point. And so we're getting into this stretch of the book where we're going to see Jesus compared to the priesthood. We're going to the Aaron Levitical priesthood, and we're going to hear about Melchizedek, and that goes through about chapter 10. So we're at the end of 4, and that goes through about the end of chapter 10. So there's a stretch where there's going to be a lot of priest talk, so I'm trying to figure out what part to cover when. So we're going to trust that God will guide my words, and regardless of what I say, he's here. He's here speaking to everyone. Hopefully he can speak through me, and we can connect more to him as we study his word. So I won't get into all that. The structure is kind of interesting how it's laid out, but we won't get into that. So I guess before we get into this section, I'm going to give like a brief summary overview of priesthood, what that meant in this context. So the Israelites were the children. You have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel. The nation's named after him. He has 12 sons, and the 12 sons all prospered. They were promised by God through Abraham, and those families grew into tribes, and so the land was divided among these tribes. So One of the sons was named Levi, so it's where the term Levite. I want to get everyone on the same page before we get into this. So the Levites were not given land like the rest of the tribes. The Levites were given the task, the opportunity to be the ones that managed the temple, managed worshiping God, or the tabernacle at the time. And so they weren't given land, they were given cities scattered throughout the land and the giving that came to the tabernacle was spread among them, so that's what they lived off of. They had some farmland, but they could work outside of these cities as they were given, but they weren't given land like the rest of them. The rest of them have. You see the map of Israel, and you'll see like Judah and Benjamin and all them. Levi doesn't get one of those. They were given cities. We'll cover some of those in a second. But I would say this. So I'm trying to figure out how much of this to get into at this point. So part of the whole tribe of Levi, that was their job. They managed all of that. There was a specific class, basically within that tribe, that were priests. They weren't all priests. They didn't all work in the tabernacle itself. They didn't all handle the sacrifices and things like that. So the priests did that work. They managed just when they were going through the wilderness, when the tabernacle was on the move, they were responsible for transporting it, packing it up, moving on to the next place, and all that kind of work too. When they set up, they were responsible for, like I said, upkeep and just managing the sacrifice systems and all that kind of stuff. So then under that priestly class, there was one high priest, a specific line. It started with Aaron. Moses and Aaron were the leaders there of Israel, because Moses kind of balked at being the mouthpiece for God. When God met him in the burning bush, he was like, I'm not a good talker. Please. And he ends up basically saying, please anyone else but me. And God's like, fine, I'll use Aaron to be your mouthpiece. And I believe Moses was supposed to be both governmental and priestly leader of the nation, and he defaulted and got to be the governmental leader and not the priestly leader. That's neither here nor there, I guess, at this point. But so Aaron is the high priest line. So he's the leader, he's the organizer, and also he's the one that one time a year gets to go and actually go into the throne room in the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies, to meet with God. So that was kind of a loss for Moses. Like I said, trying to be somewhat concise here as we get through this, so we have enough. I want to make sure everyone's on the same page before we move forward, talking about the priesthood stuff, because this gets referenced through this part. Yeah, there's interesting storylines with the high priest, but basically the high priest is the spiritual head of the nation, basically at that point. So as we move forward in the book of Hebrews, we're going to see that Jesus is named this high priest for us. Okay, so I guess now let's put the first slide. Okay, we'll get a little bit more into it at this point. So we have the tabernacle, which is God designed, Moses built, where they would worship. So this is obviously a cutaway view. You have the outer court where people would bring their sacrifices to. Then you have these inner two. You have the holy place and the Holy of Holies, which is divided by that second veil curtain. So that Holy of Holies is where the Ark of the Covenant is. It's considered God's throne. That's his footstool. So God lived among his people. And remember, Israel was chosen to be God's people as opposed to all the others, as an example of what a nation that lived for and was blessed by God would look like. Obviously, they fell short along the lines, but that's why they're Their way of life was so specific. They were designed to be set apart, be different than the people around them, because God lived with them. This is where God made his presence. The whole camp, when they were marching, was set around. This was the center of the camp, and all the tribes would be arrayed around them. The Levites would be immediately around the tabernacle and all that. So they would offer burnt offerings outside. People would bring their first fruits offerings and their sin offerings and things like that, and then the priests would participate. They would do the actual killing and burning, and it would be we frequently think of these sacrifices as you're giving something to God and you don't get anything back, but usually most of these sacrifices where you're bringing part of it to God, offering it to God, and you're sharing, you get part of it back, and you have like a celebratory meal with what's left of it. So it's not this all serious, down, hard killing thing. It's actually all celebratory for the most part and joyous. Anyway, so once a year we have what they call the Day of Atonement. So the Israelites were not perfect people, so sin would accumulate basically over the period of a year. People were not living perfectly. People were not able to keep the covenant perfectly. And before Jesus, God is unable to dwell with sin. So historically, we look back and see he had two options. One was wipe out the sin, and the other was pull back and pull away. So we see like the flood. He decided to wipe out the sin. That was what needed to happen there for cleanliness. But when we get to Babel, he pulled away and he was going to spend his time with Israel and pulled away from the rest of the nations. And both of them are really awful, ultimately, when it comes down to it. I think we look back on the destroying part and think how terrible that is, but I think him pulling away is actually probably worse for people. So, Day of Atonement is one time a year. The high priest would, first of all, make an offering for himself because he sins, and to purify himself. So ceremonially, he had to be clean before he could enter. And then he had his special robes and everything. So he had to purify himself first, go in, and then, so he would offer a bull. Then there would be these two goats, and they would cast lots for one. It was like luck of the draw for the goats. So one gets to have all the sin of the nation cast on him and sent out in the wilderness to die, and to go away and hopefully never come back. Eventually they started throwing him off a cliff because they were worried he might wander back and bring the sin back. So, but he wasn't actually killed originally. The original plan is just that was like their add-on. That wasn't God's plan. But so they would put the sins of the nation and send it out in the wilderness as a purification ceremonial act, and the other one would be sacrificed. So he would take the sacrifice, he would take some blood, he would actually dip his hand in and flick it, and the blood would cleanse. He would flick it on the altar and on the ark. And that was ceremonially an act of purifying the nation for that year, for all the accumulated sin. Well, I misspoke. That is purifying the temple if you read about it. The Day Atonement stuff was purifying the tabernacle, was purifying God's space so he could be there. He was cleansing all of this accumulated sin so God could dwell with them, so he didn't have to go away. It wasn't forgiving the people, it was cleansing the tabernacle, which is interesting because we don't usually think of it that way. So the high priest, who we're going to get into as Jesus being in that line, was the only one that was able to go into God's presence. He was the only one that could penetrate the veil. But the human high priest had sin and had to be cleansed first, because he was just human like the rest of them. He just had a different role to play. All right, so I think that's enough setup for now. So let's get into chapter 4. We'll read 14 to 16, because we didn't quite finish that last time. You know, when you're reading the Bible, the chapter and verse divisions that weren't originally there. So sometimes they're broken up in different spots than they probably should have been, because it was just a guy that added it, so it makes it easier to find things. So, I don't know. I just thought I'd throw that in too. So you'll see the way the sections break. The next section actually starts at verse 14. So, verse 14 through 16, we'll just read that. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. So the two key lines, I think, in this section is let us hold fast our confession and draw near the throne of grace. I think these are like big main points. So these three verses are kind of setting up this whole high priest section that we're about to get through chapter 10. It's sort of an intro to the concept. But this hold fast our confession is, again, the book is about encouraging these people to stay true to God, to look to Jesus and follow him purposefully with all their heart. And they do that by drawing near to him and seeing who he is and having that relationship with him. That's where the strength comes from to do that. So this is the, like I said, this is the basis, not the basis, the intro of the concept. So Jesus passed through the heavens, which is this language of passing through the veil. He's the only one who can truly pass through the veil for us and bring us all in with him. Hold fast our confession. We talked about the idea of faith as a abstract concept and faithfulness as like a life lived for in light of that belief. We can say Jesus is God. We can say, God is the only God. But if it is not in our heart, if it's not what we believe and we don't live our life out in light of that, we're missing the point. And this idea of holding fast our confession is in light of that. It's not just say the words. It's hold fast. It's a commitment. It's living our life in light of that. So moving on, we get to, in verse 15, the word sympathize. And we talked quite a bit about it. He came and lived this life. He chose to live this life so that he can connect with us. We can connect with him. We can trust him that he understands what we're going through because he lived the life. It's not just he feels sorry for you. He can connect with you. He can actively help you because he's lived it out. God, I think it was Bible Project I heard talking about this. The idea is God, it's hard to say, but it feels like God actually changed by sending Jesus to us because he became a human the language is there. He became human to understand us, to understand this life. Like, it's God's omniscient and all that. So it's hard to almost to say and accept the thought, but it seems like God wasn't fully able. I don't know. See, like, how do you even say that? But if you read it, that's what it's saying. Is God took on something that wasn't part of him. He took humanity into himself, into his being, by sending Jesus to live this life, and then coming back to him, to the ascension on the throne room. Like God took humanity, the idea of being human, into himself to connect with us, to be able to relate to us. Like, I don't know, it's this high concept thing, but it just gives a picture of how much he cared, how much he wants to connect with us, how much he loves us, as we dwell on that. And he was tempted during his life. He was tempted without sin, but he was pressured as we are. But he understood some things that we don't understand, obviously. And when he's tempted by Satan, he knew his path. He knew what he was there to do. So you read those temptations and you're like, well, Jesus wouldn't do that. That's kind of dumb. Why does he even say it? But those were legitimate temptations to him because they were an opportunity to get to where he knew he was supposed to go, but shortcut it, to take away some of the pain, to not have to go through all the stuff. He could have become ruler of the world. He could have done all that in a different path. But God had a path for him to follow. And his humanity probably didn't want to do a lot of that. But he was submissive and willing anyway. And that's what a lot of the stretch we're going today is. He was Jesus. He was the Son of God, but he was so humble and submitted that he did it all anyway. He had the choices. He had options. I think in Matthew, when Peter swings a sword, cuts off Malchus's ear, he says, I could call angels. I forget how many angels down, and God would do it. Like, I could get out of this if I wanted to. And God would have done it for him. But he didn't because he was submitted to God regardless. He wanted to go on that path. And that's our model. That's not just, oh, look, that was Jesus. He was great. That's the life we're to live. The submitted, committed life. And it's going to be pushing through sometimes the things we don't feel like doing. But ultimately, it's to our benefit and to the world's benefit and to everyone else. But that's not why we do it. We do it because he's God. If we say Jesus is Lord, that means we're completely submitted to what he has to say. So that's the path we're on together. Verse 16, let us walk with confidence to draw near the throne of grace, find mercy and grace in time of need. We can walk right into that throne room now because of what Jesus has done for us. We don't have to worry about dying. Like, if the high priest, who's supposed to be the most pure one of all of them, who lives a more separated life than all the rest of them, and follows all the rules, if he couldn't just walk in to God's presence, then no one could. And we seek God. We want to be in his presence. We talk about like curling up on his lap or him embracing us, and that imagery is true because he is our God, our Father. But it was terrifying to be actually in God's presence. Like if you read like Isaiah and these other people that actually were in God's presence, or Moses, and these are people that had a relationship, like a good, pure relationship with God. Like it's not like, is he going to be angry with me? It's just there's just this overwhelming, vast power that you can't. I mean, it'd be like if you're floating in the ocean, like a blue whale comes by you or something like that. They're not aggressive, but that would be terrifying to me anyway. I don't know, maybe some of you are into that, but like the things as long as this building is wide, and it's just if you're on the top of a mountain, a cliff, like, and there's thousands of feet below you, like, it's just this sense, you get like a little glimpse of how powerless we are and how powerful he is. And he made all of this, so obviously the scale is astronomical here, what we're talking about. But that's God, that's his presence, and it would be completely overwhelming for us to truly see him in all his glory, but he knows how to filter it, so he can be with us and we can be with him, but let's not get, I guess comfortable is probably the right word, too comfortable, to like lose the honor and the respect that's also there, that like, because we can lose sight of our relative place, I guess, if we're not careful. But we have the right, but that God, that awesome, terrifying, immense God, lets us walk into his kitchen and open the fridge. Like, he has, like I said, he has filtered so we can be around him, and he welcomes every time you approach him. He's there to open his arms and welcome us. Like that's true completely as well. And that's because Jesus has made a way for that by tearing open the curtain and letting his presence come in each and every one of us. Mercy and grace, that term that just covers everything. It's covenant love and faithfulness and favor, and it covers our failings and gives power and life. There's nothing that's lacking when we come to God. There's nothing he's going to hold back from us. We are forgiven and released, and he gives us the favor and power to overcome. We are forgiven and safe in his presence, but he also loves us and wants us there. There's no doubt whether he likes us, whether he wants to spend time with us. We talked about it before. He smiles at us every time he sees us. Like there is, when we have fear in our heart about addressing God, it's from us. It's not from his side. It's our brokenness and lack of understanding who we are in relation to him where it all falls apart. So we can confidently approach him, he invites us to intimacy. And I had this cool aside that I'm trying to decide if I want to do or not right now. I'll save it for another time. I'll find time for it. So let's move on to chapter 5, which is just continuing this thought, but those last 3 verses were kind of the intro to this. And let's read through verse 4. I think I have. For every high priest chosen from among men is appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He can deal gently with the ignorant and the wayward, since he himself is beset with weakness. Because of this, he is obligated to offer sacrifice for his own sin, just as he does for those of the people. And no one takes this honor for himself, but only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So there's kind of 4 thoughts here. First of all, this is the picture of the human high priest, at least the ideal version of it. So first of all, he's human. He's from the people. He can connect with the people. He can relate to them, but he's also called out to be a different role. So he's set apart. He had to live a holier life than everyone else, the high priest, did, as the example. Because in verse 2, it talks about he represents the God. He represents the people to God. The initial goal for God was to have a relationship with everyone in the nation, but they declined that on Mount Sinai. God wanted to connect with people, and they said, no, you go for us. And so that decision was made, So the high priest became the representative, the priestly class and the high priest specifically just became the representative between God and the people. He was the intermediary. He was the one that could be pure and in God's presence because people couldn't handle that themselves. So he would offer their gifts and their sacrifices for them. We talked about like the Day of Atonement specifically is kind of inferred in a lot of this because that was a cleansing of the whole nation. But he also offered all the other sin offerings and burnt offering and there was all those. We won't get into all of that now. In verse 2 or 3, he talks about he had weaknesses though. He had to offer sacrifices for himself. He could compassionately connect with the people because he was human with all the rest of them. He was an Israelite, all the rest of them, like all the rest of them, but he was not above them in that he didn't have to purify himself. So he had to make that offering for himself before he could. He couldn't fix them. He could offer sacrifices for them, and he'd be a covering on their behalf, not for them. And he could intercede for them. He could pray for the nation, but he couldn't fix them. He couldn't make them right with God himself. And then, so I got into this thing too. There's this idea, and if you read through almost most translations, the sacrifices for sin, the word they use is for unintentional sin. So if you read through the English Bibles that we have, it seems like there was nothing you could do about an intentional sin. But it doesn't completely make sense. Because there's breakdowns. With that interpretation, there's breakdowns. It doesn't flow through fully. If you look at Leviticus 6, I think in the first part it talks about, I believe if you've stolen from someone, that there's a way to make restitution and offer an offering, and it was not an accidental thing. It was clearly done on purpose. So that breaks this whole concept. So there's a word, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's spelled saga, like S-A-G-A. And if you read the definitions of that word, and that's the word for that, that gets translated unintentional sin, a good way to define it would be ignorantly going astray. This idea that there was no sacrifice for a sin committed on purpose just doesn't make sense, because if we know the Israelites' history, they all would have just been wiped out. They're still offering all these sin offerings, but they're clearly sinning like all over, all different ways. And you look at David, but David's put up as an example of a man after God's own heart. So I don't know why this word keeps getting translated as unintentional sin, because clearly there's intentionality to almost all these actions. But I think the idea, that is underlying it is that people we're just ignorant. We're fools. We get off the path and don't, and when we come to ourselves, like I've been treating people poorly for a while or something, and then all of a sudden I realize, oh, I've been acting like that, and that's awful, and I shouldn't have done it. And it's not that I didn't know. It wasn't like the words were just coming out of my mouth and I didn't have any control over it. I was making the choice to do it, but it's like you lose sight of yourself and God. You lose sight of who you are. You lose sight of how to live life. You let the things, you don't resist, and you get callous to the pressure and the sin and like all that. And I think that's the idea more. So I think these sins were we've done these things intentionally, and that's the idea behind this concept of sacrifice for sin, is it wasn't that I was talking and someone walked by and I hit him in the face and it was unintentional. It's not like that. It's not like I don't know, I picked up $1 on the ground and it turns out it was someone's and I could have, it's It's not accidental sin. It was done. And I just want to clarify that there was covering for that. There was a process for that, and that's the sacrificial system. There were ways, because I think it throws off some of our theology if we're trying to say there was no forgiveness, there was no way to sacrifice for a sin that was done intentionally. And I just feel like that need to be clarified, because then I don't know, it throws some other things apart. So, but the idea is the high priest, the human high priest, had to offer sacrifices for himself to purify himself before he could offer sacrifices for the people. Jesus, on the other hand, was sinless. He's our great high priest. He lived this life, so he did not have to offer anything because his sacrifice was the way he chose to live his life. His sacrifice was the daily, minute-to-minute resisting of temptations, the stuff that we were talking about earlier, the way he chose to submit to God and live in light of that regardless of whatever he was feeling in the moment. And that was his sacrifice that purified him to be able to to offer the atoning sacrifice for us. And the fourth idea here in this section is that God appoints it. You don't get to necessarily pick your role sometimes. God has made these decisions. God had a path for Jesus. God put him on this earth, even though he was God. There's obviously the language with all that, but he wasn't self-seeking. He wasn't trying to glorify himself. He wasn't doing this for his own benefit. He was walking in submission to God, and God had put this path for him. There was a line of there's a line that the high priest came from. They didn't get to pick and choose, and that line was decided by God, and Jesus was decided by God in that line. All right, so moving on to verses, we'll go through 5. We'll read 5 and 6. So also Christ did not exalt himself to be made a high priest, but was appointed by him, who said to him, "You are my son; today I have begotten you." As he says also in another place, "You are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek." So, again, Jesus, there is no language of glory in Jesus where it ever comes from him. Jesus is always humble and submitted, and everywhere there's glory, it's coming from someone else. It's God glorifying him or people worshiping him. Jesus is God and completely selfless at the same time. If anyone had a right to have an ego, it was Jesus, and he didn't. The two quotes here, they both start with "you are." One is from Psalm 2:7, which is, "I will tell the decree, the Lord said to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you." And this psalm is about the Lord coming and overcoming all the nations. Actually, in Psalm 110, which is the other one that's referred to in verse 4, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." So the author here of Hebrews ties these two together with the "you are," and makes both of these are statements by God about the coming Messiah, and that's Jesus. And so he's basically backing up his claim that Jesus is the high priest, but he also brings in this Melchizedek thing, which is going to get more fleshed out in chapter 7, so we're not going to hit it a whole lot, but he wasn't in the Aaron line. He predates that. Melchizedek was the king of Jerusalem before it was Jerusalem, basically. And when Lot was captured and Abraham had to go and rescue him after this battle with the kings all in this area, after that battle, that's when we meet Melchizedek for the first time, and he's a priest of God Most High, and we'll spend some more time on that down the line. Yeah, all right, so that's good. Let's go on to verse 7. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. This is how Jesus purified himself by submitting himself to God. And it wasn't easy. And there's some hints of like the Garden of Gethsemane, and there's hints of leading up to the cross. But I think every day I think Jesus was joyful. I think he loved the people he was with. I think he had friends, and he was accused of being a glutton and a drunkard, basically. So he was out having fun with people. But I think his joy was in the people. But he was also out there praying and weeping to the point of shedding, like bleeding, sweating blood, and there was emotion behind that. There was feelings. There wasn't. I don't imagine Jesus not feeling like it and just being like, we're good today. And just go staying in bed or trying to avoid people or all the little ways we let ourselves off the hook when we know God's prompting us somewhere towards something. He was willing to cross the social lines that he wasn't allowed to. He's talking to the women at the well. He wasn't allowed to do that. Like, culturally, there were things that would have made people uncomfortable. He went through the temple and made a big scene and drew a lot of attention on himself. He made these choices that I think we lose. It's easy not to notice how uncomfortable that might have been for him to do in the moment if he wasn't just so connected and committed to God and his voice speaking in him and through him. Like, if he didn't value God above all else, he wouldn't have made a lot of these choices in the way he lived his life. And that's how we're to live our lives. Our lives should be filled with that joy of connecting with people and God and his love flowing in us and through us. But it also is lots of acts of submission. It's lots of those little not letting yourself off the hook moments. The more we let ourselves off the hook, the more callous we become to those prompts too, and the less sensitive we are to him. And that's this danger of falling away that the author here is pushing against, is this. I'm getting Galatians and Hebrews mixed up, but there's the idea of if the more we back away, the less sensitive we'll be, and the less sensitive we are, then the less we're going to hear from. He's still speaking to us. He's always there. He's not going anywhere. But we get cataracts. We get blocked ears. We get the prompts, the little prompts, the urges in here get easier and easier to dismiss the more we do that. And that's not how to live life. That's not what he wants for it. I use the tabernacle specifically and not the temple, because I think that going back to that way of life, I think that's God's at least metaphorical ideal for us, is this. He wanted these people to just live on the land and trust him, and just be with him and let him provide their everyday thing, and not build these cities, and not get busy, and not trust in their crops, and like all this stuff that just fills our lives and gets in the way of just a pure connection to him. He wants us to sit around and enjoy our time with him and the people in our lives. And that's his picture. That's his, and we're in this world. We're in America. We can't just go find a field and live there. Like, that's not going to work that way. But that's the idea, is just this pure, simple, trust him with everything and don't worry about it, and just enjoy the moment with him and the people. And that's his heart for us, and I think that would all help us a little bit. The Sabbath thing, like, that's just an idea of, again, sit back and trust me. I'm going to take care of it. Just spend some time with me. Spend some time with your family. That's the idea there. And I'm not a great example of that, of the way I'm living my life right now. We are busy, and we got a lot of going on, and we're sorting through that with God, praying about it. But I think that's what he wants. Like, he wants connection and trust. And that's what and that's the picture of the Garden of Eden. And just walk with him. God, if you even think about it, before there was, just in the garden, before they had to work the ground, there was no death in, like, the idea was they just picked fruit off a tree. Even the plants didn't die to provide food in that earliest stage. It was just there. There was no effort. And then we get to agriculture, and we got wheat, and we got to grow it, and we got to cut it down, and we're killing it. I don't know. That was an interesting thought I just had, a realization I had recently. Like, originally it was just all there. It was just trust him and just be with me and enjoy me. And then everything, we just complicated everything through our failings, and then through our ignorance of him and our pursuit of, and lack of pursuit of him. I don't know. That was just something that came to me. But how did I get on that? Yeah, I don't know. We'll go back. In the days of his flesh. So, again, Jesus lived this life. He was God. He lived it completely as man. He didn't have God-like powers. He just had trust. He just had faith, and God worked through him. It wasn't like I said, Jesus didn't walk through the earth as a superhero. Jesus walked it through the earth as conduit for God. And that's available. That's who we are to be. That's the picture of what our walk is to be in this life. But that took effort. That took subverting his urges, his human feelings, to continually trust God in the midst of that. And it took, like I said, it took cries and tears. It took his willingness to pour those burdens out to God in the moment. Like, this wasn't just easy for him. This wasn't just this holy being kind of just floating through life. This was, he experienced every single bit of it, all the feelings, all the hurts, all the pain, but yet made the right choices all the way through, and made it possible for us to live the same way. He was heard because of his reverence. Again, it's just complete abandonment to God. And then this line, he learned obedience, which is interesting because you think, well, was he not obedient in the first place? But it's this idea, I think a little bit what I talked about with the God taking human into himself. It was a new experience. him being human was not natural almost to him, because until he made the choice to come and live among us and experience that life. And that obedience was choosing to do things he didn't want to do. Again, he wanted to follow God, like he wanted to live that life, but his body did not want to do those things. That's where the pain and the emotions and the cry that we're talking about came from. And this is what Jesus did for you, for me, for every one of us. He lived this life that way. And then being made perfect, well, he was God. He was perfect to begin with. But that idea of perfect is a sense of completion, not a sense of there was some deficiency beforehand. God perfected him, but it was like completing the role. He completed the task, not his character, he wasn't lacking anything up to that point. He just walked in humble obedience. And he became the source of eternal salvation. Again, he became our source of salvation by living that. If we look back to that atonement picture, he's modeling that out. He's cleansed himself. He purified himself by living that life. He was able to cleanse the intersection between God's throne room and the earth. And that gets to be in each and every one of us by proving himself over and over the way he lived his life. That was this cleansing process that was the perfection. It was going through the process. He never failed at any one point in the process. He didn't change character. He just proved himself over and over again by living it out. That was the perfection. So, yeah. I guess I don't want to go too much far. I think that's probably about as far as we're going to go for today. I want to read Philippians 2. We'll read 1 through 13, because I think this kind of gives another overview from Paul's. It's another statement of Paul, but this is, I think, restating kind of the whole picture of this section that we've been reading. So, and what God has for us in it. So if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. And this is kind of a picture of the way Jesus lived his life. Let each of you look not only to your own interests, but also the interests of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God has highly exalted and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that in the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only in my presence, but more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it's God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. We are made in his image, and our ultimate destination, our ultimate purpose is We're an acorn, and an acorn is an oak tree, just waiting to happen, right? It's all in there. There's there's nothing that has to come in and provide information for it to become that. It has to have the right environment, but it is an oak tree. Just like it's hard to get your head around, but we're Jesus. Obviously not the eternal God aspect of Jesus, but we are. We look at Jesus, everything about him. That's our destiny. That's our destiny. So as as an oak tree, as an acorn is to an oak tree, as we are Jesus. Like that's our path if we commit to him and pursue him with all our heart. That's the picture of who we are. And it's a crazy idea, and it sounds crazy even to say, but that's what the word tells us. He's our example, and he is a perfect reflection of who God is. And so that's our destiny. Only we can limit that. So we look to Jesus, and we look at ourselves reflected in him, and we course correct as needed, but we just enjoy his presence and let him change us. Ask him to, whatever we need to know about ourselves that needs to get changed, let him do it. Let him work on us. Let us make the choices that need to be, and we just every day speak his voice, and whatever we hear him say, we just do it. And that's the way Jesus lived. And that's life as he wants it. So let's spend some time focusing on him, praising him, and thanking him for that opportunity.